Eccoci, buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti al secondo webinar TPS. Oggi parleremo Focus Export USA, tematica di compliance riguardo allo Stato americano molto importante, in quanto in questi ultimi mesi l'attività americana ha subito delle forti evoluzioni. Basti pensare solo all'ESI Act, Proposition 65 e tante altre tematiche. Oggi però focus principale del webinar è la tematica dei PFAS. PFAS, sostanze chimiche bandite, diciamo, dalle nuove regolamentazioni americane. E oggi qui con noi abbiamo l'ingegner Gostoli che ci spiegherà dove si possono trovare questi PFAS e perché sono pericolosi questi PFAS, e collegato direttamente da Toronto avremo Tom Jonaitis, il nostro carissimo esperto e specialist americano per quanto riguarda tutta la compliance e le spiegazioni specifiche sui PFAS. Obiettivo di questa sessione è quindi offrirvi una guida pratica per esportare i vostri prodotti negli Stati Uniti, quindi cercando di evitare problemi sanzionatori o problemi legati allo sdoganamento delle merci. Quindi per chiunque abbia necessità di approfondire questo argomento ma anche gli altri aspetti, vi invito a scriverci al nostro email compliance@tpshub.it oppure seguirci su tutti i social, LinkedIn, piuttosto che YouTube e quant'altro. Toglierei poco spazio, diciamo, a questa parte introduttiva, passerei direttamente la parola all'ingegner Gostoli.
Grazie Stefano e grazie a voi che siete presenti. Io spenderò solo qualche parola giusto per introdurre un attimino l'argomento che poi ovviamente verrà ampliato nella discussione dal nostro collega di Toronto. Allora, molto rapidamente i PFAS, cosiddetti PFAS, sostanze polifluoroalchiliche, sostanzialmente sono una famiglia di composti chimici costituita dalla presenza di atomi di fluoro legati ad una catena di carbonio. Questa sostanzialmente è la struttura chimica di questi prodotti. Perché vengono utilizzati? Vengono largamente utilizzati o sono stati finora largamente utilizzati sostanzialmente perché conferiscono ai prodotti delle caratteristiche aggiuntive, nello specifico ovviamente resistenza all'acqua, resistenza al grasso e alle temperature. Questo ovviamente quindi migliora le caratteristiche del prodotto finale. Ovviamente questi prodotti hanno però delle problematiche, che poi andremo a sviscerare nel dettaglio, sia legate alla sicurezza umana, quindi personale dell'uomo, che anche ovviamente per la sicurezza ambientale. Si trovano sì, molto spesso ci sono diverse gamme di prodotti che utilizzano questo tipo di prodotto, questa molecola sostanzialmente, quindi la troviamo per esempio per il trattamento delle superfici, ad esempio viene utilizzato come impermeabilizzante in tessuti e altri trattamenti antimacchia, insomma hanno una buona efficacia da questo punto di vista. Ancora negli imballaggi alimentari, per esempio confezioni, involucri di carta, sostanze per la protezione delle superfici, attrezzature antincendio, materiali industriali, quindi hanno sostanzialmente hanno avuto una larga espansione come nel loro utilizzo, proprio perché hanno dei vantaggi innegabili. Qual è il problema? Il problema è legato al fatto che queste sostanze, i PFAS, hanno una elevata persistenza nell'ambiente e anche nel corpo umano, quindi ovviamente venendo a contatto con il corpo umano possono persistere e quindi dare sostanzialmente una problematica personale all'uomo, e in più sono degli inquinanti soprattutto a lungo termine per l'ambiente. Quindi per capirci, ovviamente non possiamo e questo è ciò che la normativa sostanzialmente vuole arrivare, non possiamo permetterci di avere questi prodotti ovviamente dispersi in ambiente o a contatto con noi. Pertanto risulta sicuramente importante approfondire l'argomento, capire quale può essere la gestione. Oggi lo faremo con il nostro collega per ciò che riguarda il mercato americano, ma non escludiamo di poterne riparlare a breve per il mercato nazionale, perché ovviamente il problema si sta allargando, diciamo, sta diventando noto non solo oltre frontiera ma anche ovviamente nel mercato interno, e quindi verrà, molto probabilmente lo dovremo andare ad affrontare a breve anche nel mercato italiano. Quindi non mi dilungo oltre sull'argomento, anche perché il nostro Tom ha in merito non solo esempi di problematiche correlate, ma anche di soluzioni in termini di certificazione e quant'altro. Quindi non mi dilungo oltre, dicevo, passo la parola al nostro collega e poi insomma in modo tale da approfondire la tematica direttamente oggi per quel che riguarda il mercato americano. Grazie. Grazie a voi, a presto.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to TPS's Export USA webinar on the topic of the regulation of PFAS in consumer goods. Here we have a brief agenda. We will go over some technical background related to PFAS, a discussion on federal regulations, some examples of individual state regulatory updates, and then some compliance and strategies for companies to address this issue. So first off, what are PFAS? PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This is actually an umbrella term for a large number of synthetic chemicals that fall into this category, and there are thousands of individual chemicals that meet this definition. These have been widely used for many decades in consumer, commercial, and industrial products. And here's an example of a few of the many different categories of products that have used PFAS. So everything from food packaging, cosmetics, pesticides, textiles, cookware, vehicles, and electronics. PFAS are chemically inert and temperature, light, and chemical stable. So they're very good at what they do. And you'll see them most specifically in products that will require water repellency, stain or oil repellency. They are also used as surfactants, lubricants. They're used widely in electrical insulation and as well as flame retarding materials. Here are some examples. When we talk about PFAS, we have many different chemicals, but here are some that are probably the most commonly regulated and referenced. So we have PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, PFAS, perfluorooctane sulfonate, and perfluorononanoic acid, or PFNA. And here are some examples. So there are basically long-chain carbon molecules where each carbon is attached to a fluorine atom. And they can have various other chemical constituencies. So what are the issues with PFAS? So first, as can be seen, they have very widespread use and exposure, ultimately exposure to humans from the products they use, as well as leaching into the environment out of products after they've been disposed of. And this can lead to environmental contamination, leading to drinking water exposure. They are very persistent. As I mentioned, they are highly stable, so they only break down extremely slowly in the environment. This means that they can bioaccumulate, which means they build up in the environment or in the body of biological systems. So not only in humans, but also animals and other organisms that can accumulate these from the environment. And then most importantly are their toxicity concerns. And this is dependent on the specific chemical, but they've been linked to long-term health consequences, such as cancer, hormone disruption. There's adverse effects on the liver, thyroid, reproductive organs, fetal effects on the developing fetus, impacts on the immune system, and research is ongoing. But as can be understood, there are thousands of chemicals and only a small subset of these chemicals have actually been evaluated. So that is the most concerning thing, because we don't even know what we don't know about these chemicals yet, or about all the chemicals. So with regards to the federal level in the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, regulates the manufacture, processing, distribution, and disposal of many PFAS chemicals under either TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act, or significant new use rules, where they provide they create specific rules for how certain materials can be used, and other rulings. This is it's important to remember in this webinar that we will provide some key insights into the regulations, and this isn't an exhaustive list of everything that may be applying to these materials, because that would be highly complex and take a very long time to go over everything. So we're going to provide some key insights here as to what is going on right now. So the EPA issued a PFAS strategic roadmap back in 2021 to show how they're going to be moving into further regulating and controlling the use of PFAS. Some of these chemicals have been also regulated for many, many years, but those restrictions are starting to ramp up. So importantly, under TSCA, Section 8A7, and this has just recently come out, that the EPA will require each company, each person who has manufactured or imported PFAS in any year since 2011 to report certain information about those products. So that includes, how it's been used, in what kind of products, the amounts, as well as, disposal procedures, things like that. The opening of the reporting date is expected for later this year, July 11th. That's expected. They will have to have all their systems in place to be able to take in this information. So more information will be we'll be monitoring for that information as we approach this date. Most companies will need to complete their reporting by January 11th of 2026. So that's approximately 6 months or so from opening of the portal. And then some small businesses will have a full year until July 11, 2026, if they are involved only in the importation of PFAS-containing articles. So other federal regulations that are currently being considered is US EPA is going through a comment period regarding PFAS use in plastics and containers. So to see how it's currently being used in order to better regulate it as they move forward. EPA finalized a significant new use rule, or SNUR, that prevents the resumption of manufacturer processing of PFAS that are no longer being used in the States without an EPA review. So, many uses of PFAS have already been phased out or have been abandoned, but they're just making sure that no one goes back to those previous processes. As well, articles that includes textiles, carpets, furniture, electronics, and household appliances that can contain certain PFAS chemicals cannot be imported into the US unless EPA reviews and approves the use. So these are all things that are ongoing, and more details can be found on the government website. So, it's interesting because there is one, so we kind of want to know, okay, where are these chemicals actually being found? And there's a specific legislation in California that tracks products that have been targeted under this regulation for where certain chemicals are being detected. So it gives an insight into what types of products are being targeted. And we can see that there's quite a long list, everything from a wide range of clothes, tablecloths, umbrellas, various food products. Seafoods have found PFAS in them. Paper straws, grilling mats, seat covers, bandages, feminine hygiene products, pet products. So the list is quite extensive, and it'll continue to grow as this issue of PFAS in our products and our environment continues to be investigated. I think we'll see these sorts of things continue to be found, and these, whether they're specifically used or not, that's going to be part of the ongoing research. So now we have federal regulations for PFAS, and we have state level. Individual states are creating their own PFAS regulations because obviously they can enact laws for their state much faster than the US EPA can, and they can be tailored to their specific concerns and needs. So here are some key differences about these regulations between federal and states. For example, under TSCA, it's defined that PFAS is defined under structural definitions that specify what sort of material meets that definition. While in the states, they're providing more general definitions of anything that contains a fluorinated organic chemical, a fully fluorinated carbon atom, which would not typically show up in other situations, and just broadly target those types of materials. So when we talk about TSCA again, they're more focused on specific chemicals based on specific toxicology data. And they're trying to broaden that in order to capture more chemicals that may fall into this definition, as we saw based on the structures, to capture chemicals that may have issues, while states are more focused on just banning PFAS in general product categories. So when we're talking about in all cosmetics, in all textiles, they have some exemptions, but the key thing is that we can see that they're more broadly applying these regulations in their states. So what do we end up with here? So, TSCA, for example, is provides harmonized rules that apply to all stakeholders in a unified manner. It's very clear who has to comply, what are the requirements, and everyone can very clearly understand what needs to be done. But with regards to the states, because there are so many, it makes a patchwork of individualized regulations that continue to evolve. As we'll see in some of the examples I provide, some states will regulate cosmetics in several pieces of legislation. So one, they ban PFAS in cosmetics. Then PFAS comes up again in another piece of legislation that covers all sorts of products, including cosmetics. And so in this fashion, it can be a very arduous and complex task in understanding exactly, which states are regulating, which PFAS or which products, when those rules come into play, and so on and so forth. Some states are doing absolutely nothing, and maybe they're banking on the fact that if most other states regulate PFAS, then by default, companies will be reformulating, and therefore the products will be addressed in that manner. So over the last several years, 23 plus states have enacted over 100 bills related to PFAS in all facets. So it's everything from allocating funds to research and investigate PFAS in their environment, remediation of toxic sites that have PFAS, evaluating drinking water is a very big concern, specific regulation of products, so on and so forth. So we can see there are a lot of regulations related to PFAS in the United States when you consider all the different states. So what I'm providing here is a brief overview to give you an idea of how products are starting to become regulated in certain states. This is not an exhaustive list of all regulations that apply to a specific category. Every day, new laws are being proposed, which can then take several years to be enacted, or then it doesn't go through. So this is to provide an overview of things to consider. For example, in cosmetics and personal care products, these can be found in shampoo, dental floss, and any sort of makeups and things that are anti-smudge or waterproof have often used PFAS. So, for example, in California, under Proposition 65, several PFAS are already listed, and these apply to all products. So whether it's these PFAS chemicals in cosmetics or in any products, if they are found, you need to address the Prop 65 requirements regarding warnings. There are several other pieces of legislation that specifically apply to PFAS in cosmetics, including the manufacturing of products with PFAS, that have been enacted in California. And these, as of January 1st of this year, are effective. Colorado has a similar ban on intentionally added PFAS in cosmetics that is effective this year. Maine enacted a law that is a disclosure law that requires that any product containing intentionally added PFAS must have a written notification sent to the Department of Environmental Protection and provide specific information on that. So that's their first step, to better understand what sorts of products are coming into their state with PFAS, how much is it being used, and things of that nature. And so this requirement is already in place. But moving forward, they are continuing to add additional laws, and by 2030, it's going to be essentially a ban on all added PFAS, unless it is cleared by the department. So, for example, there may be certain products that there are no alternatives, and it has the importance of using PFAS exceeds, the safety concerns of using that product. So, unless it is cleared by the DEP, it'll essentially ban all PFAS in certain products. So, for example, in electronics, where there is no, there's very, the exposure to humans can be highly regulated. Perhaps in that case, that might be an example of something that would get cleared to continue to use PFAS if there are no better alternatives. But also considering there has to be some sort of addressing of the disposal of those electronics. If they have PFAS in them, the concern is also leaching out after disposal. So something in that nature would still need to be addressed. Maryland, same. They're using a similar approach to California. It's effective this year. PFAS in cosmetics. Minnesota, same thing. Oregon, same thing. In a few years. So they first banned cosmetics with intentionally added PFAS, and then in 2 years, they will also ban the manufacturing. Now we'll go into some food-related uses. So obviously there are some authorized uses of PFAS, including polymerized PFAS in nonstick coatings in cookware. FDA has evaluated this and found that there's essentially negligible migratable small molecule PFAS migrating into food from use of these types of products. So there's essentially no dietary exposure. So the chemistry of PFAS is also complicated because we have to understand that just because it's there doesn't mean that it's resulting in human exposure. PFAS can also be used in the production of other food contact polymers, but the amounts are very low and therefore exposure is also very low. Various food processing equipment can use gaskets and O-rings made with PFAS. And FDA specifically stated that as of January of last year, 2024, substances containing PFAS are no longer being sold in the US market for food contact use for grease-proofing papers and grease-proofing papers. And though any uses of those have been revoked, however, there may be other food contact uses that are still going to be regulated. So here I'm going to go into states that have regulated food contact or food material, food cookware, things of that nature, that are sometimes lumped together with a range of other types of products that have been enacted. So in Colorado, as of this year, they are prohibiting sale of certain outdoor apparel unless you disclose on the product that it contains PFAS. As of next year, they will be banning PFAS in cookware, as well as a range of other products, including cleaning products, feminine hygiene products, ski waxes. And then 3 years from now, they will be banning additional product categories that contain intentionally added PFAS, as well as artificial turf. Maine is also banning the PFAS use in cookware, cleaning products, cosmetics. Then they've also, this is an example where these are the specific prohibitions put in by Maine versus the previous discussion, which was related to the notification of the use of PFAS. Here, they're by starting next year, all these product categories will have banned the use of PFAS. So as of January 2021, this is an important piece of legislation where they are prohibiting the use of any food packaging with PFAS. And specifically, it states that manufacturers are required to use the least toxic alternative, such that you cannot just switch one regulated PFAS for another. You actually have to ensure that what you're replacing it with is actually the least toxic option available. This legislation also requires manufacturers to provide notices for products sold online that contain intentionally added PFAS for cookware. So any pots and pans that use PFAS, even if it's authorized and permitted, needs a disclosure. Another piece of legislation here in California that is now effective is the use of PFAS in new textiles. So the base essentially banning the use of PFAS in textiles. There are, of course, certain exemptions and requirements that need to be followed, but California is certainly leading the way in some of these sorts of prohibitions of PFAS use. Oregon has a specific one that has been enacted and is effective for foodware containers containing intentionally added PFAS. So that's like any kind of cookware, pots, pans, bowls, anything. Other states such as Illinois, Montana, Minnesota also have significant legislation and regulations that are proposed or enacted where they're really trying to prohibit the use of PFAS in a wide range of product categories. So moving in now, we're going to discuss some compliance tools and strategies. So first, of course, the number one step is to understand if PFAS chemicals are being used in any of your products. Either you may specifically know that they are because of the type of product that had traditionally required the use of PFAS because of its effectiveness, or need to consider whether it may be present without your knowledge. So you need to go through, obviously, and check formulations, technical data sheets, specific supplier declarations, including confirmation that they don't use any PFAS in the production of their materials. So these are all very proactive steps. It's going to require, robust conversations with suppliers and vendors to get to the bottom of this. I'm sure many companies are already doing this for EU requirements and so on and so forth, but it's an ongoing step that will be required for compliance in the US. Once you have additional information, obviously you're going to have to do detailed research and reviews of both federal and individual state regulations for the latest requirements that apply to those sorts of products. It's important to understand that, certain legislation may be proposed. You have to check whether it's actually been enacted, determine compliance dates, understand what steps are going to be needed or are required. In some cases, some states have, notification regulations to like inform the agencies about the use of PFAS, followed by an actual ban or prohibition. So those steps need to be followed. Now we get into an option, depending on the product category and the supplier information or potentially lack of supplier information, testing may be necessary to confirm the presence of PFAS if there is an elevated risk for them being present. This may be necessary also just for general verification. Some customers may be asking for compliance declarations from your company. And so how do you go about doing that? Well, you obviously know what goes in after the first step. You obviously know whether or not you intentionally use PFAS for any of your production. And do you need to do anything beyond that? Well, right now it's not specified that you have to do any testing at all if you know that it's not in there. However, in some cases, it may still be valid to do either verification to ensure that suppliers have the most accurate and verifiable information that they're providing you. And this may be done sporadically or periodically just to confirm that the products remain to be clear of any PFAS. Of course, nothing is easy, and testing of PFAS chemicals is actually quite complicated. And there are several considerations because the research and science of testing different types of products for PFAS is an ongoing and developing area. So, of course, if you're considering testing, make sure to speak to a qualified lab because their chemists will be able to clarify exactly what sort of approaches would be appropriate for your specific products. So, although some states have not specified a level, some have stated that, if fluorine is below 100 parts per million, then that is what's considered to be free of PFAS, if it's known to not be there. Because testing, there's thousands of chemicals. So you cannot test for all the different PFAS that are out there. So because all PFAS contain fluorine, there are some considerations in initially testing for total fluorine. If the total fluorine is below 100 parts per million, it can be reasonably concluded that then obviously your product does not contain PFAS. However, there are additional considerations because when you're talking about polymerized PFAS in a product, that may not necessarily be accessible in a total fluorine test. So is it going to capture the different types of PFAS? Depending, again, on the product, it may or may not. So a second tier may be these other methods. So it could be total organic fluorine, absorbable organic fluorine, or extractable organic fluorine, because the organic fluorine is the key element of PFAS. It's the fluorine attached to the carbon that makes it organic. So again, depending on the specific products that you have, the exact methods need to be carefully evaluated because they have certain methods that can readily detect fluorine in, for example, water. But when you're talking about an article like a consumer product, the methods are different, and some of them are still just being developed and are not actually fully validated yet. But that'll continue to improve as we go forward. So as we mentioned, it depends on the matrix of the thing that you're testing and how far you need to go, how low you need to go for a detection limit. So some other considerations. So if you do use PFAS in any products, you will need to consider its removal or reformulation of many product categories. So need to consider that several states have specified, and this is obviously not just because the state said so, but just for careful consideration, is that you have an effective alternative substance but that is the least toxic one. And for some of these materials, there may not be sufficient safety data available to robustly, and clearly define that it is less toxic than some of the PFAS that you may be currently using. And need to consider also that, this obviously, headlines have been raised about PFAS, and governments are talking about it, and industry associations are talking about it, and consumer groups are talking about it. The detection of PFAS in some products is already creating an issue for certain products, for example, under Prop 65, that result in civil penalties in that state for products that do not have warnings for PFAS if they contain them. And as we go forward and consumers and governments are further tuning into the presence of PFAS in products, this can lead, the detection of PFAS in your product can lead to further legal actions, potentially fines, could result in, obviously, when you're importing products, could create issues. Consumer backlash and trust in brands and products can be damaged through overlooking or missing some of these elements of evaluating for the presence of PFAS. So in conclusion, PFAS have been used in a wide range of products through many different industries. Their use is now being associated with a range of health concerns that we've just begun to understand and quantify. Many of these chemicals do not have enough safety data, and that is part of the concerning element of these types of chemicals. PFAS is regulated both federally in the US and by individual states. It's very important for companies to carefully evaluate their products and make comparisons, for example, between EU requirements to US federal as well as the individual state regulations to fully understand what are the requirements. More and more stakeholders are going to be asking for more information about PFAS, declarations, confirming that products are free of PFAS, so on and so forth. So all companies need to be prepared and take the necessary steps to be able to comply with these requirements and address these concerns. So how can TPS help? Obviously, TPS can support in evaluating the specific regulations that apply to your type of product. They can interpret those regulations and determine what next steps you need. They can help compile due diligence documentation and support you throughout all these different steps of evaluating PFAS compliance. Here we have TPS's contact information, website, email, phone. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and thank you for your attention.